Thank you so much for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy to be here. I've been to many political conferences throughout my life, as you can probably imagine. And to be honest with you, most of them are just disguised PR events where everyone, acts really important and drinks a glass of wine and repeats the same platitudes. But I have a sincere feeling that this summit is different. I believe that this is the type of gathering that has the potential to end up in history books. A gathering that is either going to be described as a crucial turning point for Europe, one where a group of young, strong-willed patriots came together, turned things around, and ultimately laid the foundation that saves Europe from destruction. Or, this is obviously a very different scenario, the type of gathering where a bunch of evil far-right fascists all gathered and tried to prevent the world from progressing into this borderless state where everyone dances happily under gay rainbows and lives happily ever after. Because we all know that it's this way. History is written by the victors. And although I realize that that is an intense way to start off a speech, I genuinely believe that at this conference, we are discussing the greatest question of our time. Our establishment clearly knows that as well. That is why, as you just heard, they tried to do everything in their power to prevent us from being here today. But it seems that they still haven't quite figured out that we are the types of people who do not back down. We are the types of people that no matter how much they try to intimidate us or try and stop us, that we will continue on with our mission. We won't back down from discussing the truth, and today we most certainly will not back down from discussing remigration. I think it's true. Every other right-wing talking point, let's say wokeism or taxes or climate communism, they can all be discussed in meaningful ways, but they quite literally come secondary. If we don't do something about our demographics now, in a few decades from now, there quite literally will be no civilization to pass on or to protect from these subversive ideologies. This is the fight, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to decide our fate. The fate of our continent, our countries, and of our people. It is up to us to get it right, and it's up to us to make sure that remigration happens. How do we do that? Well, the Overton window, I think, is shifting, but we all know that it hasn't shifted quite enough yet. Every time we talk to an NPC about remigration, the same old clinchers always come up. People either say that we have an aging population and we need immigrants because, quote, who else is going to do our shitty jobs for us? Or B, they go on a rant saying that remigration is highly immoral and that you're a Nazi for even wanting to discuss the term. Or, if they're not necessarily against it, but they lack any backbone, they're simply going to say that it's impossible and that we will never succeed to get it done. None of these three statements are true. But before I get further into that, let's for a moment discuss what will happen to Europe if we do not make remigration happen. The fact of the matter is, and I still find it shocking every time I say this, is that if nothing changes, we ethnic Europeans will become a minority in most of our homelands by the end of this century. In some countries, like in Germany and in Sweden, we will become a minority before the first half of this century ends. Mind you, that is in less than 25 years. With the current rate of immigration, I don't think that this surprises any of you. In the Netherlands, we have a so-called right-wing government right now, yet 1,200 immigrants enter our nation weekly. In Germany, the net migration stands at 1.5 million people a year. In the UK, we're talking 600,000. In France, a little over 500,000. The Swedish population grows with 1% solely because of immigration every single year. So I think it's safe to say that closing the borders is absolutely pivotal, but it's no longer enough to save Europe. And that's where the subject of birth rates come in. Not only do immigrants come in vast numbers to Europe, but they quite literally multiply. For the average first-generation immigrant in Europe, the birth rate lies between 2.5 and 3.5 children per woman. The second generation only lies a little bit lower, between 2 and 2.5. Now, white, ethnic European people, on the other hand, are nowhere near that number. In fact, we consistently have a fertility rate that falls below the replacement rate of 2.1. In the UK, it's at 1.6, in Germany 1.4, Sweden 1.5, and here in Italy, where we are today, it's at an all-time low of 1.19. These are the numbers. These are the facts. But we don't need to do the math to know that what I'm saying is true. All we need are our two eyes. Mass immigration from groups with high birth rates plus low birth rates amongst ethnic Europeans is what combines and constitutes to the Great Replacement. As some of you might know, I gave a speech about that very topic in Budapest last year. This speech sent shockwaves throughout the world, whether they were positive or negative depends on who you ask. But the most important thing is that it made something happen. A forbidden subject matter was suddenly being discussed. And acknowledging the Great Replacement to be real, I think, is the very first step towards fixing the problem. But like I said, closing the borders alone is not enough to prevent Europeans from being replaced. The antidote to the Great Replacement is remigration. And I think that the way to get the general public on board with the concept is to make them painfully aware what will happen if we don't start remigration. All we have to do to imagine what Europe will look like in a few years from now is to look at areas in Europe where the immigrant population is already a majority or a vast majority. Think Rinkeby, Stockholm. Think Saint-Denis, Paris. Think Molenbeek, Brussels. All of these places have become literal no-go zones where the police has already lost the monopoly on violence. Ladies and gentlemen, I think there's a term for that. It's called occupied terrain. We have been invaded, and those areas have already been conquered. And for the rest of Europe to turn into these types of no-go zones, all we need is a little bit more of the same type of political inaction that we've been seeing for the past few decades. A few more years of that, and our beloved Europe will quite literally be no more. And what will happen in the meantime? Well, I can guarantee you that it won't be pretty. In the direct future, violence against the white native population of Europe will increase exponentially. We will hear even more stories about white boys and girls being raped and killed by immigrants. I could stand here quite literally another half an hour and summarize or give you guys a list of all of the incidents that happened even in the past few months. But for time's sake, I won't do that. However, it is time that someone says the truth about those rapes. They aren't incidents. People need to understand that the Rotterdam rapes that we heard all about on X, thanks to X actually, didn't just happen in Rotterdam. They happen all over the continent. Granted, maybe they don't happen in an equally organized manner, like they did in Rotterdam, but they are equally intentional in nature, in the sense that they have the same core characteristics. Namely, immigrant rapes white boy or girl at a moment in a public space where they never could have seen it coming or didn't expect it. The victim walked out the door that day, went to school, went to go and visit a family member, visit the park, and they simply never came back home. Instead, they were found left for dead, half naked, somewhere in the bushes. I can sense that me saying that makes you uncomfortable, and all I can say to that is, good, good. Because that is our reality, and it's been happening under our noses for far too long. These are genocidal rapes, ladies and gentlemen. They are a war tactic used against the native population of Europe to unsettle and ultimately break our soul, if not our entire being. Let me make one thing clear, by the way, about these rapes. In any of these cases, there is not one perpetrator. There are at least two. There's the rapist, of course, and then there are the people who allowed, no, in fact, dare I say, wanted all of that to happen. Because all of this is the result of people who want Europeans to become a minority in their own homelands. And sadly, we can find these people in all branches of the state, be it in government that actively imports immigrants, be it in parliament that writes the laws to do it, or in the legal system that allows all of it to happen and in fact tries to stop everyone who tries to do something about it. Let me paint a picture for you of the legal system, the average legal system in the 21st century here in Europe. Immigrant rapes white boy or girl. Immigrant, even though, he might not even be charged with a crime. If he does, gets into the courtroom, faces a white judge, and gets a ridiculously low sentence because he's either a minor, he has a low IQ, or he simply didn't know any better because he comes from a different cultural background. And then a right-wing activist says something about all of that happening, and that same right-wing activist gets a higher sentence than the rapist by that same white judge for speaking the truth. In fact, some people here today are living proof of that reality. This is the reality of our citizens in the direct future. But what do you think will happen to those very public spaces in which these crimes take place? What do you think will happen to all that beautiful cultural heritage that we have in Europe? Our cities are literal works of art, and it's no wonder that the entire world comes to visit them. White people have no culture is the single most ridiculous lie that I've ever seen spread on social media. It's a miracle what our civilization has brought forth, honestly. But especially in the big cities, as we just discussed, the degradation is extremely visible. Once again, of course, as a result of the active attack on our heritage by both the left and the immigrant population. And the thing is, once it's gone, it's gone. Unless, ladies and gentlemen, we turn this whole thing around with remigration. At the beginning of this speech, I mentioned the three biggest hurdles that we have to overcome to make remigration happen. They always say, these lies that we have to debunk. The first lie being the one about the aging population, the jobs. The second one, it's so unethical, it's so immoral. And three, it's impossible. When it comes to the jobs, we all know that a really large number, in fact, of immigrants that come to Europe do not work and put a huge strain on our welfare state. They're a huge cost to our treasury. Adding to that, in the future, I'm sure AI will take away many, many jobs. And the salaries for the native population will definitely not increase if we keep on importing people who are going to do those jobs at a very low wage. Maybe we should focus instead on having the native population, maybe get a little bit of extra child support when they do in fact decide to have a family. But more importantly, let's get to the second lie that we have to debunk, which is the one about the ethics of remigration. Our political enemies love to falsely associate remigration with the deportation of the Jews during the Second World War. They like to brush us off as violent Nazis who are going to put people on trains and deport them to deportation camps just because they are of a different race than us. I don't even want to waste time, really, to defend our movement against such bad faith attacks. But let me just state for the record that anyone who actually takes the time to read the proposal that Martin Sellner has created on how to implement remigration, anyone who does that will know that it's complete and utter BS. The execution, yeah, it's important. The execution of remigration is not violent. And last time I checked, it is absolutely warranted to take action against people who break your laws. However, this World War II guilt complex is still very much present and is something that keeps us Europeans, especially, let's say, hostage, from discussing this very subject. Because clearly, the Americans don't suffer from this same complex. Look at Trump. He openly campaigned, advocated, and is now implementing mass deportations. I think that's a term that is stronger, right, than remigration. However, I understand, of course, that there are historical differences between America and between Europe. In fact, Europe historically has always been a white continent, not majority white, but essentially entirely white. So for the ethnic European population to suddenly become a minority in one single generation because an elite forced that upon us is not something that we have to accept. It is not unethical to want Europe to stay European. Africans have Africa, Asians have Asia, Europe belongs to the Europeans. If it's not unethical for other cultural ethnogroups to have their homelands, why would it be controversial for us? I would like to ask a question. How much can something change until that very thing ceases to be the thing that it was? I think that's the question we have to ask when it comes to Europe. Is Europe still European if the white population, the ethnic population of Europe, becomes a minority on its own continent? Would China still be China if, let's say, now the vast majority of the population would start to suddenly consist of Black Africans? I think all of us would say to that question, no. To not want that to happen is not unethical, especially not if we look at the consequences of mass migration. The fruits of mass migration to Europe from the Third World have been insecurity, impoverishment, and cultural decay. To not want that to happen to your home is not just right, it's in fact your duty to prevent it from happening. Therefore, I think we have to be realistic. Civic nationalism doesn't work, not at this rate of immigration. It doesn't mean that we can't have a small number of immigrants come to our country, immigrants who are well integrated, but not millions of people who come here with the sole aim of living a better life. Because living a better life for them doesn't mean living a better life for us. So having discussions, that focus solely on the concept of integration really bothers me at this point. We could have had those discussions before we decided, or let's say someone decided for us to open the borders and let in millions of people. Before we could have had that discussion. Right now, it is nothing but a means to stall true progress when it comes to undoing this whole situation and saving our civilization. So what do we do? Is it possible, third question, for us to start remigration? My answer to that is very simple. Yes. Where there is a will, there is a way. Don't be fooled. Our politicians are absolutely able to carry this out. They're simply unwilling right now. And so, to hide their unwillingness, they hide behind international treaties. They hide behind human rights. But these treaties are not reflections of natural law. They are not an infallible source of moral superiority. In fact, those treaties were drafted less than a century ago, I believe, to genuinely make the entire concept of nation states redundant and to do away with Christian principles such as the sanctity of life, liberty, and property. What we have to do is we have to take back our own definitions, common sense definitions, of what our rights as the native population of a continent are in line with natural law. Because your nation, your homeland, is an extension of you and your family, and it's your duty to protect it. So forgive my French, but I really genuinely do not give a rat's ass what the UN says. Migration to the Western world is not a human right. We need to let go of the lie that everyone has the right to come and live a better life in Europe just to be financially better off. Economic migration is something that should be of benefit to the host country, not to the guests. It's that simple. And yes, of course, being charitable, helping those who are truly in need is something that we as Christians will do. But we will do it for the limited time that those people actually need protection. And I think that it should be done in the safest country closest to home. And last time I checked, the safest country closest to Syria, for example, is not the Netherlands, and it's not Germany, and it isn't Sweden either. So it's time for us to reinstate those common sense definitions, dismantle the NGOs that constantly make a fool of us and help immigrants to abuse our systems. And we have to stop being taken advantage of. We have to protect what is ours first and who we love first. And we can do that right now if we start with remigration. Thank you so much.